The subway's last ride. It was a cold, rainy night in New York City. The type of night where the mist clung to your clothes and the city's usual hustle and bustle was muffled by the steady patter of rain. Eva hurried down the steps of the subway entrance at 14th Street, her umbrella barely keeping her dry. She was late, as usual, and the next train wouldn't come for another 20 minutes. She sighed, resigning herself to the wait. The platform was eerily empty. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows on the tiled walls. Eva shivered, not just from the cold, but from the unsettling feeling creeping up her spine. She glanced at the schedule board, hoping for a reprieve, but the one train was still 20 minutes away. She paced back and forth, the echo of her footsteps bouncing off the walls. It was too quiet. She checked her phone, no signal, not even a bar. A deep, distant rumble suddenly reverberated through the tunnel. Eva peered into the darkness, expecting to see the headlights of an approaching train. But there was nothing. Moments later, she heard a low whisper, a sound so faint it could have been her imagination. She strained to listen, heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, coming from the darkened tunnel ahead. Eva stepped closer to the edge, trying to see into the pitch-black void. "Help me?" A voice echoed, clear and desperate. Eva froze. She looked around, hoping to see someone else on the platform, but she was alone. The voice was unmistakable now, pleading for help. Against her better judgment, she took a tentative step forward, peering into the darkness. "Please, help me?" The voice repeated, more insistent this time. Eva's curiosity got the better of her. She fumbled for her phone, using the flashlight to pierce the gloom. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the rusted rails and grimy walls of the tunnel. And then she saw it. A shadowy figure crouched near the tracks, just beyond the reach of the light. "Are you okay?" Eva called out, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but the whispering continued, growing more frantic. Eva hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to stay back. But the figure's plight tugged at her heartstrings. She took a deep breath and stepped off the platform onto the track, carefully moving towards the figure. As she approached, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist around her. The figure was clearer now, a young woman, her clothes tattered and her face pale and gaunt. She looked up at Eva with hollow, haunted eyes. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing sound of the approaching train. Eva reached out to help her, but as soon as her fingers brushed the woman's arm, a jolt of icy cold shot through her. She tried to pull back, but the woman's grip was like iron. Eva's heart raced as she struggled to free herself, but the woman's eyes locked onto hers, filled with an eerie, unnatural light. "Join me," the woman hissed, her voice transforming into a sinister growl. The ground beneath Eva trembled as the train roared closer. She pulled with all her strength, finally breaking free and stumbling back onto the platform. The woman's face twisted into a mask of rage and sorrow, her form dissolving into shadows. Eva scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. The train screeched into the station, its brakes whining in protest. She backed away, eyes wide with terror, as the doors slid open. The car was empty, save for the flickering lights and the oppressive sense of dread that hung in the air. She didn't dare step on, Instead, she bolted up the stairs, not stopping until she was back on the rain-soaked streets. Gasping for breath, she glanced back at the subway entrance, half expecting to see the shadowy figure following her. Eva never took the subway at night again. She later learned that many years ago, a young woman had been pushed onto the tracks at that very station. They never found her body, and her spirit was said to haunt the tunnels, seeking someone to join her in her eternal torment. And on those cold, rainy nights, when the mist hangs heavy and the city falls silent, you might still hear her whispers, echoing through the tunnels, begging for help that will never come. The Shadows of New York. It was a cold, foggy night in New York City. The streets, usually bustling with life, were eerily quiet. The mist rolled in thick from the East River, cloaking the towering skyscrapers and casting ghostly halos around the streetlights. Lydia, a young journalist, was on her way home from a late-night shift at the office of the Daily Times. She had just finished a piece on the recent string of disappearances that had been plaguing the city. As she walked down the desolate streets, Lydia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. She had always prided herself on being fearless, but tonight, an inexplicable sense of dread gnawed at her. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing off the buildings, amplifying the silence. Turning a corner, Lydia found herself in a narrow alleyway, the shortest route to her apartment. Halfway through, she heard a faint whispering sound, like a distant conversation. She stopped, straining her ears, but the whispers ceased. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as her imagination and continued walking. Suddenly, the streetlights flickered and went out, plunging the alley into darkness. Lydia's heart raced. She fumbled for her phone to use the flashlight, but it slipped from her trembling hands, clattering to the ground. The whispers returned, louder this time, surrounding her. Panicked, Lydia crouched to retrieve her phone, her fingers brushing against something cold and clammy. She recoiled, her breath hitching in her throat. The whispers grew louder, forming words she couldn't understand. She glanced around, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dark, and saw shadows moving, dancing on the walls as if alive. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and thin, its face obscured by the fog. "Who are you?" Lydia demanded, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer but took a step closer. She could feel its eyes on her, piercing through the mist. Suddenly, Lydia remembered the tales she had heard from old city folklore, stories of shadow people who thrived in the darkness, preying on the unsuspecting. She had always thought them to be mere myths, but now, faced with the unknown, she wasn't so sure. The figure moved closer still, and Lydia's instincts screamed at her to run. She turned and sprinted back the way she came, the whispers turning into a cacophony of voices chasing her. She didn't dare look back, fearing what she might see. She burst out of the alley and onto a more familiar street, illuminated by the dim glow of the remaining streetlights. Gasping for breath, she dared to glance behind her. The alley was empty, the shadows seemingly gone. Lydia continued her frantic run until she reached her apartment building. She fumbled with her keys, finally managing to unlock the door. She slammed it shut behind her, locking it tightly. Leaning against it, she tried to calm her racing heart. Inside her apartment, She turned on every light, banishing the shadows. She grabbed her laptop, determined to document what she had experienced. As she typed, the words flowed easily, the fear still fresh in her mind. She titled her story "The Shadows of New York" and hit save. As she sat back, a notification popped up on her screen. It was a news alert. Another disappearance had been reported, this time just a few blocks from her office. The victim had been last seen in an alleyway, similar to the one Lydia had just escaped. A shiver ran down her spine as she realized how close she had come to being another name on the growing list. She closed her laptop, but the feeling of unease lingered. Lydia knew she would never forget the whispers or the figure in the fog. As she lay in bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced at the window, where the curtains fluttered gently in the breeze. Just outside the glass, she could have sworn she saw a shadow move. Lydia pulled the covers up to her chin, her eyes wide open, unable to sleep. She knew the city held many secrets, but some were better left undiscovered. And as the fog rolled in once more, the whispers began anew, a haunting lullaby that would echo in her mind forever.